Karoline Leavitt lived a simple, predictable life in her small New Hampshire town. She was the kind of person you'd pass on the street without giving much thought to, friendly, but unassuming, always with a tote bag full of papers or books slung over her shoulder. By day, she taught history at the local high school, where her students admired her for her passion and patience. By night, she juggled being a mom to two energetic kids, Emma and Liam, while trying to keep up with household chores and endless piles of grading. But one evening, as Karoline sat at her kitchen table surrounded by essays about the American Revolution, something unusual happened that would change everything. It started innocently enough. A notification popped up on her laptop screen indicating she had received a new email. At first glance, it seemed like just another spam message cluttering her inbox. But when she clicked on it out of habit, what she saw stopped her cold. The subject line read, "Urgent Operation Shadow Veil." The body of the email contained strings of numbers, strange symbols, and references to names she vaguely recognized from news headlines. Politicians, corporate CEOs, even law enforcement officials. There were phrases like offshore accounts, classified documents, and blackmail files. None of it made sense immediately, but one thing was clear. This wasn't meant for her eyes. Confused and intrigued, Karoline scrolled further down and noticed an attachment labeled evidence.pdf. Her finger hovered over the mouse uncertainly. Should she open it? What if it was some sort of virus or phishing scam? But curiosity got the better of her. Clicking on the file, she found page after page of detailed reports, bank statements, and photographs linking powerful people to activities that looked highly illegal. Arms deals, money laundering, bribery, and more. At first, Karoline thought it must be fake. Who wouldn't? These were people who appeared regularly on television, shaking hands and smiling confidently. Surely they couldn't be involved in such sinister schemes. Yet the more she read, the harder it became to dismiss. Everything seemed meticulously documented, down to dates, locations, and dollar amounts. And then there was the final piece that sent chills down her spine, a line near the bottom stating, "All evidence stored digitally will self-delete within 48 hours unless accessed." Her heart began to race. Was someone watching? Had whoever sent this accidentally included her in their mailing list, or was this intentional? Either way, Karoline knew she couldn't ignore it. If these allegations were true, and they certainly seemed plausible given the level of detail, it meant dangerous people were operating right under everyone's noses. People who might go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. For hours, Karoline pored over the documents, cross-referencing names online and piecing together fragments of information. Each discovery left her feeling more uneasy. One name stood out repeatedly, a prominent senator rumored to have ties with controversial defense contractors. Another belonged to a CEO whose company had recently been awarded lucrative government contracts despite scandals surrounding its business practices. Even worse, several individuals listed worked in law enforcement, including agents from federal agencies. By midnight, exhaustion hit her like a wave, but sleep felt impossible. Questions swirled in her mind. What should she do next? Delete the files and pretend she never saw them? Report it to someone trustworthy? Or try to investigate further herself? The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't a detective or a journalist, she was just a teacher. How could she possibly handle something this big? Still, ignoring the situation didn't sit well with her conscience. As a history teacher, Karoline often reminded her students about the importance of standing up against injustice even when it was scary or inconvenient. Now faced with her own moral dilemma, she realized she couldn't turn away. Someone had trusted her, or maybe fate itself, to uncover the truth. Whatever the reason, she decided she owed it to herself and others to act. The next morning, after dropping off her kids at school, Karoline spent hours researching whom to contact. Local police? No, too risky if corrupt officers were involved. A journalist? Maybe, but leaking classified information could land her in legal trouble. Finally, she settled on the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. They dealt with national security threats, corruption, and organized crime, all areas touched upon in the documents she possessed. Surely they'd take her seriously. With trembling hands, Karoline printed out copies of the most damning evidence and packed them into a plain manila folder. Then, taking a deep breath, she drove to Washington, D.C., determined to deliver the information personally. The journey felt surreal, as though she were stepping into a movie plot rather than real life. Every mile brought her closer to uncertainty, yet also closer to doing what she believed was right. When she finally arrived at FBI headquarters, the sleek glass and concrete building loomed before her like a fortress. Walking through its heavy doors, she felt tiny and insignificant amidst the hustle and bustle of agents moving briskly around the lobby. Approaching the front desk, she introduced herself nervously and explained why she was there. To her relief, instead of brushing her off, the receptionist directed her to Agent Marcus Hale, a senior investigator known for handling complex cases. As Karoline waited anxiously in a sterile conference room, clutching her folder tightly, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they believe her? Or would they think she was delusional, wasting their time with conspiracy theories? Little did she know, her arrival marked the beginning of a story far larger than anything she could have imagined. Agent Marcus Hale was not the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. With over 2 decades of experience in law enforcement, he had seen it all. Or so he thought. When his assistant informed him that a civilian named Karoline Leavitt had arrived at headquarters claiming to possess sensitive information about a potential national security threat, his first instinct was skepticism. Civilians often came forward with wild theories or exaggerated claims, hoping to gain attention or fame. But something about this case felt different. Karoline sat nervously in the conference room, her hands clasped tightly around the folder she'd brought with her. She looked like any other ordinary person you might pass on the street. A teacher, a mom, hardly the type you'd expect to walk into FBI headquarters unannounced. Yet there was a determination in her eyes that caught Agent Hale's attention. As he entered the room and introduced himself, he noticed how carefully she chose her words, speaking with both urgency and caution. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, pulling out a chair across from her. "Can you tell me why you're here today?" Karoline nodded, taking a deep breath before launching into her story. She explained how she'd stumbled upon the mysterious email by accident, detailing its contents and showing him the printed documents she'd brought along. At first, Hale listened quietly, jotting down notes as she spoke. But when she handed him the folder and he started flipping through the pages, his expression shifted. His brow furrowed, and he leaned forward slightly, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine intrigue. "These names," he muttered under his breath, scanning the list of individuals mentioned in the documents. Some were familiar faces from recent news cycles, politicians embroiled in scandals, corporate executives accused of unethical practices. Others were less public, but equally alarming, including members of law enforcement agencies. The sheer scope of the allegations left even a seasoned investigator like Hale momentarily speechless. "This is serious," he finally said, looking up at Karoline. "Do you understand what you've brought us?" She nodded solemnly. "I know it sounds unbelievable, but I wouldn't have come here if I didn't think it was real. Someone sent this to me for a reason. Whether accidentally or intentionally, I couldn't ignore it." Hale studied her for a moment longer, then stood up abruptly. "Stay here," he instructed. "I need to bring this to my team. Immediately." As Hale left the room, Karoline exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. For weeks she'd carried the burden of knowing what she knew alone. Now she had entrusted it to professionals who could hopefully make sense of the chaos. Still, doubt lingered in her mind. Would they believe her? Or would they dismiss her as some naive schoolteacher meddling in matters beyond her comprehension? Meanwhile, Hale gathered a small group of trusted agents in a secure briefing room. He spread the documents across the table, explaining their origin and significance. At first, the reaction was cautious. Several agents raised eyebrows, questioning the credibility of the source. After all, unsolicited tips rarely panned out, especially those delivered by civilians with no prior connection to intelligence work. But as they dug deeper, skepticism gave way to alarm. Forensic analysts ran preliminary checks on the digital files Karoline had provided, confirming that the metadata matched legitimate timestamps and locations. Cross-referencing the names listed revealed patterns too consistent to be coincidental. Bank records tied to offshore accounts aligned perfectly with transactions flagged during previous investigations. Even the photographs appeared authentic, capturing private meetings between key figures implicated in the documents. "It's a conspiracy," one agent murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. "A massive one." The implications were staggering. If true, Operation Shadow Veil represented one of the largest corruption scandals in modern history, involving not only high-ranking government officials but also major corporations and elements within law enforcement itself. Worse still, the network seemed designed to evade detection, using layers of secrecy and intimidation to maintain control. Back in the conference room, Karoline waited anxiously, unsure of what was happening behind closed doors. Hours passed and the silence weighed heavily on her. Finally, Hale returned, accompanied by another senior agent. Their expressions were grim but resolute. "Ms. Leavitt," Hale began, sitting down across from her again. "We've reviewed your evidence, and we believe you may have uncovered something significant. However, we need to proceed carefully. This isn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It's about ensuring your safety and ours while we investigate further." Karoline nodded, though her stomach churned with apprehension. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "For starters," Hale replied, "you'll need to stay under our protection until we can determine the extent of the threat. These people aren't amateurs. They're highly organized and dangerous. If they find out you've shared this information, they won't hesitate to act." The gravity of the situation hit Karoline like a ton of bricks. Until now, she'd been focused solely on doing the right thing, never fully considering the risks involved. Suddenly, images of her children flashed through her mind. What if something happened to her? Who would take care of them? Fear gripped her heart, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I understand," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Over the next few days, Karoline worked closely with Hale and his team, providing additional context and answering countless questions about how she'd obtained the documents. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded rapidly, drawing in specialists from various departments within the Bureau. Agents combed through databases, conducted interviews, and traced connections between the individuals named in the files. Each new discovery added another layer of complexity to the case. One breakthrough came when forensic analysts managed to decrypt a section of the documents labeled confidential correspondence. Inside were emails exchanged between several high-profile figures discussing plans to manipulate legislation, rig elections, and funnel money into illicit activities. The language was coded but unmistakably incriminating. It became increasingly clear that Operation Shadow Veil wasn't merely a rogue operation. It was a systemic effort to consolidate power and wealth at the expense of democracy itself. Yet amid the progress, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Not everyone within the Bureau welcomed the investigation with open arms. Whispers circulated among certain agents, suggesting resistance to digging too deeply into such sensitive territory. One afternoon, Hale received an anonymous tip warning him to back off unless he wanted trouble. Though vague, the message carried an unmistakable tone of menace. Despite the growing unease, Hale remained undeterred. He knew the stakes were too high to abandon the case. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the agency might be leaking information to those implicated. Paranoia began to creep into the halls of FBI headquarters, casting suspicion on colleagues once considered trustworthy. For Karoline, the days blurred together in a haze of fear and determination. She stayed in a safe house arranged by the Bureau, cut off from her family and friends to minimize the risk of exposure. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face, sent her pulse racing. Yet through it all, she clung to the belief that she was doing the right thing. Her students' voices echoed in her mind, the lessons she'd taught them about courage, integrity, and standing up for justice. She couldn't let them down now. As the investigation continued, pieces of the puzzle slowly fell into place. But with each revelation came new questions and new dangers. Little did anyone realize the most shocking twist was yet to come. As the investigation into Operation Shadow Veil deepened, the atmosphere within FBI headquarters grew increasingly tense. What had started as a promising breakthrough quickly turned into a labyrinth of suspicion and betrayal. For Karoline Leavitt, the days spent under protection felt like an endless game of cat and mouse, where she never knew who to trust or what might happen next. Agent Marcus Hale was determined to uncover the truth, but cracks were beginning to show in his usually composed demeanor. The anonymous warning he'd received weighed heavily on him, not just because of its chilling implications, but also because it hinted at a mole within the Bureau. Someone inside their own ranks was feeding information to the conspirators. Every meeting, every strategy session, now carried the risk of being compromised. Trust, a cornerstone of any successful investigation, was crumbling before their eyes. To make matters worse, strange things began happening. Documents disappeared from secure servers overnight. Surveillance footage showed shadowy figures lurking near safe houses used by witnesses cooperating with the investigation. One evening, while reviewing case files late at night, Hale noticed that a folder marked "Confidential, Do Not Share" had been accessed without authorization. Whoever it was hadn't even bothered to cover their tracks properly, leaving behind a digital breadcrumb trail leading straight to Deputy Director Laura Trent. Laura Trent was a respected figure within the FBI, known for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication to justice. She had risen through the ranks over 3 decades, earning accolades for her work dismantling organized crime rings and exposing corporate fraud. To accuse her of involvement in something as sinister as Operation Shadow Veil seemed unthinkable. Yet the evidence pointed squarely in her direction. Hale wrestled with the decision to confront her. On one hand, accusing a senior official based on circumstantial evidence could destroy careers, including his own, if proven wrong. On the other hand, ignoring the signs could jeopardize the entire investigation and put countless lives at risk. After agonizing deliberation, he decided to bring the matter to Internal Affairs discreetly, requesting they monitor Trent's activities closely. What followed was a high-stakes game of surveillance and counter-surveillance. Agents assigned to watch Trent reported seeing her meet with individuals linked to the conspiracy in dimly lit parking lots and secluded cafes. Encrypted messages sent from her phone matched patterns found in communications tied to Operation Shadow Veil. Still nothing definitive emerged, until one fateful morning when everything changed. It began with a routine sweep of Trent's office. A technician tasked with updating security protocols stumbled upon a hidden partition on her computer, containing classified documents related to the case. Among them were detailed instructions on how to sabotage the investigation, along with names of agents marked for intimidation or worse. When confronted, Trent initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming the files must have been planted there to frame her. But as pressure mounted, cracks appeared in her carefully constructed facade. During a tense interrogation led by Hale, she finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want this," she confessed, her voice trembling. "They threatened my family, my husband, my daughter." Her words trailed off, filled with anguish. According to Trent, she had been coerced into cooperating with the conspirators after receiving explicit threats against her loved ones. Photos of her teenage daughter walking home from school accompanied menacing messages instructing her to comply or face consequences. Desperate to protect her family, she agreed to leak sensitive information and obstruct the investigation wherever possible. It was a Faustian bargain, one that haunted her every waking moment. The revelation sent shockwaves throughout the Bureau. Agents who had once looked up to Trent as a role model now struggled to reconcile her actions with the person they thought they knew. For Karoline, it was another reminder of the lengths people would go to protect themselves, or those they cared about. As much as she wanted to feel anger toward Trent, she couldn't help but empathize with the impossible choice she'd faced. With Trent's confession, the investigation gained new momentum. Armed with concrete proof of insider involvement, Hale and his team redoubled their efforts to expose the full extent of Operation Shadow Veil. They tightened security measures, weeding out potential leaks, and fortifying their defenses against further attacks. Witnesses who had gone silent out of fear were reassured that steps were being taken to ensure their safety. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Yet even as progress was made, the danger escalated. Those implicated in the conspiracy weren't about to let themselves be brought down without a fight. One night, as Karoline sat alone in her safe house watching old movies to distract herself, the power suddenly went out. At first, she assumed it was a simple outage, but when she heard faint footsteps outside her door, panic set in. Grabbing her phone, she dialed Hale's number, whispering urgently, "Someone's here." Within minutes, armed agents surrounded the house, sweeping it thoroughly for intruders. Though no one was found, the incident served as a stark reminder of how vulnerable she remained. From that point forward, additional guards were stationed around the clock, and Karoline was moved to a more secure location. Meanwhile, public attention began to turn toward the unfolding scandal. Bits and pieces of information leaked to the press, sparking widespread outrage. News outlets ran headlines questioning the integrity of government officials and demanding accountability. Social media buzzed with speculation and calls for reform. Protesters took to the streets holding signs that read, "Expose the truth," and "Justice over corruption." For Karoline, the sudden spotlight was both empowering and terrifying. On one hand, she felt vindicated knowing that others shared her outrage and supported her decision to speak out. On the other hand, the scrutiny came with risks. Conspiracy theorists accused her of fabricating the story for attention, while defenders of the accused launched smear campaigns painting her as unstable or delusional. Friends and neighbors back home whispered behind her back, unsure whether to believe the woman they'd always known as quiet and unassuming. Through it all, Karoline leaned on the support of Agent Hale and a small circle of trusted allies within the Bureau. Their encouragement kept her grounded during moments of doubt. "You're doing the right thing," Hale told her repeatedly. "No matter what anyone says, you've given us a chance to fix something broken. That takes courage." As weeks turned into months, the investigation expanded beyond U.S. borders. Evidence revealed offshore accounts tied to shell companies operating in countries with lax regulations, making it easier for funds to flow undetected. Intelligence agencies from allied nations joined forces, sharing resources and expertise to track down key players. Arrest warrants were issued for several high-profile figures, though many managed to slip away, disappearing into underground networks designed to shield them from prosecution. Despite these challenges, the tide was turning. Public pressure forced lawmakers to hold emergency hearings, inviting whistleblowers and experts to testify about systemic corruption. Karoline prepared to step forward, knowing her testimony could be pivotal in securing convictions. It wouldn't be easy, facing hostile questioning from lawyers hired by the accused, but she resolved to tell her story honestly and without hesitation. In the quiet moments before sleep, she often thought about the ripple effects of her decision. Would this lead to real change, or would the powerful find ways to rebuild their empire once the dust settled? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. She had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished easily. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope. For justice, for transparency, and for a future where standing up for what's right didn't come at such a steep personal cost. Little did she know, the most dramatic chapter of her journey was still ahead. Months turned into years, and the aftermath of Operation Shadow Veil continued to ripple through society. The scandal had left an indelible mark on the nation, reshaping how people viewed power, accountability, and justice. For Karoline Leavitt, life remained a delicate balancing act, between rebuilding her personal world and navigating the spotlight thrust upon her as a symbol of courage in the face of corruption. The legal proceedings dragged on longer than anyone anticipated. High-profile trials dominated headlines, with each verdict sparking debates about fairness, privilege, and systemic reform. Some defendants received harsh sentences, their careers and reputations destroyed, Others managed to negotiate plea deals or evade full accountability due to technicalities in the law. Despite these mixed outcomes, one undeniable truth emerged. The public now demanded transparency like never before. Trust, once shattered, could only be rebuilt through consistent action. Karoline watched it all unfold from a distance, though. She was far from detached. She testified multiple times, answering questions with the same calm resolve that had defined her initial appearance before Congress. Each courtroom visit brought back waves of anxiety, but also moments of vindication. When a jury convicted a former senator tied to illegal arms deals, she allowed herself a rare smile. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was happening, and she knew her role in exposing the truth had been crucial. Outside the courtroom, Karoline focused on growing Voices for Integrity, the nonprofit organization she founded during the height of the scandal. What began as a small initiative quickly gained momentum, attracting volunteers, donors, and supporters eager to contribute to meaningful change. Schools across the country adopted its educational programs, teaching students about civic responsibility, ethical leadership, and the importance of questioning authority. Public seminars drew crowds of curious citizens hungry for tools to hold institutions accountable. One of Karoline's proudest achievements came when Voices for Integrity launched, a national hotline for whistleblowers. Modeled after similar initiatives abroad, the service provided secure channels for individuals to report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. Within months, calls poured in, from government employees, corporate insiders, even members of law enforcement, all seeking guidance on how to expose misconduct safely. Karoline worked closely with legal experts to ensure every caller received proper support, knowing firsthand the risks they faced. Her efforts earned recognition beyond what she ever imagined. Award ceremonies honored her contributions to social justice, and invitations to speak at conferences piled up. Yet despite the accolades, Karoline stayed grounded. She refused to let fame define her, choosing instead to focus on the work that mattered most, empowering others to stand up for what's right. Still, challenges persisted. Those implicated in Operation Shadow Veil who escaped prosecution didn't disappear quietly. Instead, they regrouped, using their remaining resources to fight back. Disinformation campaigns flooded social media, attempting to discredit both Karoline and the broader movement she represented. Anonymous trolls attacked her online, spreading false narratives designed to undermine her credibility. At times, the barrage felt overwhelming, leaving her exhausted and questioning whether the battle would ever truly end. But Karoline found strength in unexpected places. Her children, Emma and Liam, grew into resilient young advocates themselves, inspired by their mother's example. They joined school clubs focused on activism and participated in marches calling for greater government oversight. Friends and neighbors who had initially distanced themselves slowly returned, offering words of encouragement and practical help. Even some former critics softened their stance, admitting admiration for her unwavering commitment to integrity. Agent Marcus Hale remained a steadfast ally throughout the journey. After retiring from the FBI, he dedicated himself to mentoring aspiring investigators and advising organizations working to combat corruption. Together, he and Karoline co-authored a book detailing the events surrounding Operation Shadow Veil, hoping to inspire future generations to remain vigilant against abuses of power. The memoir became a bestseller, further amplifying their message of hope and resilience. As time passed, signs of progress began to emerge. Lawmakers enacted sweeping reforms aimed at increasing transparency in government operations and corporate practices. Whistleblower protection strengthened significantly, ensuring those brave enough to come forward wouldn't face ruinous consequences. Independent oversight committees formed to monitor activities within intelligence agencies, preventing another shadow veil from taking root unnoticed. Yet amid the victories, lingering questions haunted Karoline. Had they caught everyone involved? Or were remnants of the conspiracy still operating in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to resurface? These doubts kept her vigilant, reminding her that vigilance was key to maintaining the fragile gains achieved thus far. Despite the uncertainty, Karoline chose to focus on the positives. She marveled at the thousands of people inspired by her story to take action in their own communities. Teachers incorporated lessons about accountability into their classrooms. Journalists pursued investigative reporting with renewed vigor. Citizens organized grassroots movements demanding ethical governance. Change, though slow and uneven, was undeniably underway. On quiet evenings, Karoline often reflected on the path that led her here. From the night she discovered the mysterious email to the day she walked into FBI headquarters, everything seemed surreal, a twist of fate no movie script could capture. Yet, through it all, one constant guided her decisions: the belief that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, was worth any cost. Years later, as she stood beside her grown children at a community event celebrating civic engagement, Karoline felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Emma and Liam, now adults, spoke passionately about continuing the fight for justice, carrying forward the values instilled in them by their mother. Around them, strangers approached to thank Karoline for her bravery, sharing stories of how her actions had inspired them to make a difference. In that moment, surrounded by love, gratitude, and purpose, Karoline realized something profound. Courage isn't measured by grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. It's found in the everyday choices we make to stand firm in our convictions, even when the odds seem insurmountable. And while the scars of her ordeal would always remain, so too would the knowledge that she had helped pave the way for a brighter, more transparent future. Operation Shadow Veil may have ended, but its legacy lived on, not as a reminder of darkness, but as proof that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. And for Karoline Leavitt, that was a legacy worth fighting for. The day of Karoline Leavitt's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee arrived with a weight that pressed heavily on her chest. She had spent weeks preparing, rehearsing answers to potential questions, and steeling herself for the emotional toll it would take. But no amount of preparation could fully ready her for the reality of walking into a room filled with stern-faced senators, cameras flashing, and reporters scribbling furiously in notebooks. The stakes were impossibly high. Her words could either dismantle a decades-old web of corruption or be dismissed as the ramblings of an overzealous civilian. As she sat at the witness table, flanked by Agent Marcus Hale and a legal team provided by the FBI, Karoline took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone in front of her. The chairman of the committee, Senator Gregory Hayes, leaned forward, his expression neutral but probing. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, "thank you for coming forward today. Your courage has brought critical attention to matters of national importance. Please tell us how this all began." Karoline nodded, clearing her throat. For the next hour, she recounted her story: the accidental discovery of the email, the shocking contents of the documents, and her decision to bring them to the FBI. She spoke plainly, avoiding dramatic flourishes, wanting nothing more than to convey the truth as simply and clearly as possible. As she described the names and activities outlined in the files, murmurs rippled through the crowded hearing room. Some senators exchanged glances, while others jotted down notes with increasing urgency. When she finished speaking, the questioning began. Lawyers representing the accused launched aggressive attacks, accusing her of fabricating evidence, seeking fame, or acting out of personal vendettas. One attorney even suggested she might have been coerced into participating in a political witch hunt. Each accusation stung, but Karoline refused to let them rattle her. With calm determination, she countered every claim, pointing back to the overwhelming body of evidence supporting her account. Agent Hale stepped in periodically to corroborate her statements, presenting forensic analyses, intercepted communications, and testimonies from other whistleblowers who had since come forward. Together, they painted a damning picture of Operation Shadow Veil, a sprawling network designed to manipulate global politics, rig economies, and silence dissent. But the most explosive moment came when a junior senator from Vermont, known for his outspoken advocacy against corruption, produced a document obtained just hours earlier. It was a signed affidavit from Deputy Director Laura Trent, detailing not only her forced cooperation with the conspirators, but also naming several high-ranking officials directly involved in orchestrating the scheme. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the affidavit was read aloud, each revelation more shocking than the last. Public reaction was immediate and visceral. Social media erupted with hashtags like "Expose the Truth" and "Justice for Karoline," while cable news networks interrupted. Regular programming to cover the unfolding drama. Protesters gathered outside government buildings across the country, holding signs demanding accountability. Even some members of Congress broke ranks, calling for independent commissions to investigate further. Yet, not everyone welcomed the exposure. Powerful allies of those implicated fought back fiercely, deploying teams of lobbyists, public relations experts, and sympathetic journalists to discredit the investigation. They portrayed Karoline as unstable, suggesting she had fabricated the entire story after becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories online. Others claimed the FBI had manufactured evidence to justify expanding its own powers. Despite these efforts, cracks continued to form within the walls of secrecy surrounding Operation Shadow Veil. More whistleblowers emerged, emboldened by Karoline's example. A former corporate executive confessed to funneling millions into offshore accounts tied to illegal arms deals. An ex-intelligence officer revealed details about covert operations used to destabilize foreign governments for profit. Each new voice added layers of credibility to the case, making it harder for skeptics to dismiss outright. Back at FBI headquarters, Agent Hale and his team worked tirelessly to connect the dots between disparate pieces of information. Their efforts paid off when they uncovered a hidden server located in a remote data center overseas. Stored inside were terabytes of encrypted files containing everything from financial records to video footage of clandestine meetings. Decrypting the data required weeks of round-the-clock work, but once unlocked, it provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy's scope and scale. Armed with this trove of evidence, federal prosecutors moved swiftly, issuing arrest warrants for dozens of individuals, including several sitting members of Congress, CEOs of major corporations, and senior law enforcement officials. Raids conducted simultaneously across multiple states netted key players, though some managed to escape, disappearing into underground networks funded by their ill-gotten gains. For Karoline, the victories were bittersweet. While she felt vindicated, knowing justice was finally being served, the cost of her actions weighed heavily on her. Living under constant protection had taken a toll on her mental health, leaving her exhausted and anxious. Her children struggled to adjust to life without her, relying on relatives and friends to fill the void, and despite the support she received from strangers, isolation crept in as old acquaintances distanced themselves, unsure how to reconcile the woman they knew with the public figure she had become. One evening, as she sat alone in her temporary housing scrolling through messages of encouragement on social media, Karoline paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the students she taught, many of whom now followed her story closely. In class discussions, they often debated the ethics of whistleblowing, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Knowing that her actions inspired young minds to think critically about power and accountability gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. Determined to channel her experience into something positive, Karoline began brainstorming ways to create lasting change. With guidance from trusted advisors, she founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting transparency, civic engagement, and ethical leadership. Named Voices for Integrity, the group aimed to educate citizens about the importance of holding institutions accountable while providing resources for others, considering coming forward with sensitive information. Her first project involved partnering with schools nationwide to develop curricula focused on media literacy and government oversight. Workshops taught students how to identify credible sources, analyze complex issues, and advocate for policy reforms. Public seminars brought together experts from various fields to discuss strategies for combating corruption and fostering trust in democratic systems. Slowly but surely, Voices for Integrity gained traction, attracting volunteers, donors, and supporters eager to join the fight for a better future. Meanwhile, The legal proceedings against those implicated in Operation Shadow Veil dragged on, bogged down by appeals, motions, and endless delays. Some defendants accepted plea deals in exchange for reduced sentences, agreeing to testify against higher-ups in hopes of leniency. Others dug in their heels, mounting expensive defenses that stretched trials into years-long battles. Throughout it all, Karoline remained steadfast, attending hearings whenever possible and offering testimony when called upon. Though the process was grueling, she found solace in small victories. A guilty verdict here, a confession there. Each step forward reinforced her belief that persistence, coupled with integrity, could overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. By the time the dust began to settle, Operation Shadow Veil had unraveled entirely, exposing a level of systemic corruption few had imagined existed. Sweeping reforms followed, including stricter regulations on campaign financing, enhanced oversight of intelligence agencies, and measures to protect whistleblowers from retaliation. Lawmakers introduced bipartisan bills aimed at rebuilding public trust, signaling a rare moment of unity amid divisive times. For Karoline, the scars of her ordeal would never fully heal. Trust, once broken, is hard to repair. Yet she looked back with pride, knowing she had stood up for what was right, even when it meant sacrificing comfort, safety, and peace of mind. As she watched her children grow into compassionate, thoughtful individuals, she hoped they'd inherit a world shaped by courage, honesty, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Little did she realize, however, that her story was far from over. New challenges lay ahead, testing not only her resilience but also the fragile progress achieved thus far. But for now, standing amidst the ruins of a shattered status quo, Karoline allowed herself a quiet moment of triumph, a reminder that sometimes ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.